The child was kept in a cage for 2 years. The rancher shot the lock and took her home. He liked it that way. People in nearby areas knew him as a man of few words, someone who kept to himself and never caused trouble. He had chosen this life after many years of hard work elsewhere, hoping peace would finally stay with him. Most days were the same. He fixed broken fences, checked water sources, and watched the sky for changes in weather. At night he sat on his porch, listening to the wind move through the grass. Silence was something he respected. It helped him think. But over the past few weeks, that silence had started to feel different. It no longer felt calm. It felt heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The rancher first noticed something strange while riding along the edge of his property. One section of the fence had been disturbed again, even though he had repaired it just days earlier. At first he thought it was an animal. Wild creatures often pass through the area, but the marks didn't look normal. They seemed intentional, as if someone had been there recently. He brushed the thought away, telling himself not to imagine problems where there were none. Later that evening, he stopped by the small supply store miles away to pick up tools. While waiting at the counter, he overheard two locals speaking in low voices. They mentioned an old property not far from the rancher's land, a place people avoided. One of them said strange sounds were sometimes heard there at night. Another said no one had lived there in years, yet lights were occasionally seen through broken windows. The rancher listened without interrupting. He didn't like gossip, but something about their tone made him pay attention. These were not people known for making up stories. When he asked casually about the place, the men went quiet. One of them shrugged and said it was probably nothing, just animals or old equipment moving in the wind. Still, the unease in their faces stayed with him as he left. That night, the rancher found it difficult to sleep. The wind outside sounded louder than usual. His dogs, usually calm, kept lifting their heads and listening toward the same direction. The rancher tried to ignore it, but his instincts, sharpened by years of working alone, told him something wasn't right. He reminded himself that fear grows easily in quiet places. Still, the feeling refused to leave. Over the next few days, small signs kept appearing. Fresh tire tracks near a dirt path that hadn't been used in years. Trash where there shouldn't have been any. Once, while riding near the edge of the land at dusk, he thought he heard a sound that didn't belong there. It wasn't an animal. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it carried a tone that made him stop. He waited, holding his breath. The sound did not come again. He told himself he was imagining things. Life on a ranch could play tricks on the mind. Loneliness sometimes made ordinary noises seem important, but deep down he knew this was different. He had lived here long enough to understand the land. It was speaking in a way it never had before. One afternoon, as clouds gathered in the sky, the rancher decided to ride closer to the abandoned property mentioned in the store. He didn't plan to go inside. He just wanted to see it for himself. The building stood in poor condition, surrounded by tall weeds and broken wood. Windows were cracked and the roof sagged slightly. From the outside it looked empty, forgotten by time. As he stood there, a strange silence surrounded the place. Even the birds avoided it. The rancher felt a chill run through him, though the air was warm. He noticed marks near the back of the building, like something heavy had been moved repeatedly. The ground was worn down in a way that didn't match abandonment. Someone had been here recently. He circled the place slowly, careful not to make noise. Every instinct told him to leave, yet something stronger pulled him forward. It wasn't curiosity alone. It was concern. A quiet voice in his mind asked a question he could not ignore. What if someone needed help? He didn't see anyone, but the feeling grew heavier the longer he stayed. The rancher decided to return home before dark, promising himself he would think more clearly in the morning. Still, as he rode away, he glanced back more than once, unable to shake the sense that he was leaving something unfinished behind. That night, sleep refused to come again. Memories from his past surfaced, moments when he had ignored his instincts and regretted it later. He had learned, sometimes the hard way, that silence can hide pain. He sat up in bed, staring into the darkness, and finally accepted the truth. Whatever was happening near that place, it wasn't harmless. The next day, he prepared himself carefully. He packed water, food, and basic tools, telling himself he was just going to take a closer look. If nothing was there, he would leave. If there was trouble, he would act responsibly. He was not a reckless man, but he was not the type to walk away from a possible wrong. As he rode out, the sky was clear, but his thoughts were heavy. He replayed every sign in his mind, every sound, every mark on the ground. He knew that once he crossed a certain line, his quiet life might never return to the way it was. But he also knew that some moments define who a person truly is. When he reached the edge of the abandoned property again, the air felt still, too still. He tied his horse at a distance and approached on foot. His steps were slow and careful. The building loomed in front of him, silent and closed, yet somehow watchful. He paused, listening. That was when he heard it again. A faint sound, barely more than a whisper, carried through the broken structure. It was not loud enough to identify clearly, but it was enough to stop his heart for a moment. The rancher stood frozen, every sense alert. The sound came again, weak but real. At that moment, he knew his life was about to change. He did not yet know what he would find or how deep the darkness went. He only knew one thing for certain. Walking away was no longer an option. The rancher stood still for a long moment, listening carefully. The faint sound came again, soft and uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. His heart beat faster, but his mind stayed clear. Years of working alone had taught him to stay calm, even when fear appeared. He took a slow breath and stepped closer to the building, placing his feet carefully on the ground to avoid making noise. The door to the building was slightly open, hanging crooked on its hinges. It creaked gently when the wind moved it. He waited until the wind settled, then pushed the door just enough to slip inside. The air inside was stale and heavy, as if it had not been disturbed in a long time. Dust covered the floor, and old furniture lay broken in the corners. Light entered through cracked windows, creating long shadows that stretched across the room. At first, the place looked empty. The rancher scanned the space slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He listened again. The sound was still there, faint but steady, coming from deeper inside the building. It was not loud enough to understand, but it carried something that made his chest tighten. It sounded like fear mixed with hope. He moved forward, one careful step at a time. Each sound he made seemed louder in the quiet room. His boots brushed against the floor, stirring dust into the air. He passed through one room, then another, each one showing signs of neglect. Old boxes were stacked against walls, and torn cloth hung from rusted nails. This place had been forgotten by the world, but it was not empty. The sound grew slightly clearer as he reached a narrow hallway. His hands tightened into fists, not from anger but from focus. At the end of the hallway was a door unlike the others. It was newer, stronger, and closed tightly. The rancher paused, listening closely. The sound was coming from behind that door. He placed his hand on the door and felt a strange chill. For a moment, doubt crossed his mind. What if he was wrong? What if he was stepping into something dangerous? But then the sound came again, weak and uneven, and his doubt disappeared. No place should hide a sound like that. He opened the door slowly. Inside, the room was smaller and darker. The light barely reached the corners. At first, his eyes did not fully understand what they were seeing. Then his breath caught. In the center of the room was a metal structure, worn and rusted, locked tightly. Inside it, curled up on the floor, was a small child. The rancher froze. His mind struggled to process the sight. The child looked thin and exhausted, her clothes worn and far too large. Her hair was tangled and her face was pale. She lifted her head slightly when she heard him, her eyes wide and filled with fear. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply stared, as if unsure whether he was real. The rancher felt a sharp pain in his chest, a mix of shock, sadness, and anger. He had seen many hard things in his life, but nothing like this. No child should ever be hidden away like this. No child should ever look at another human being with that kind of fear. He lowered himself slowly, making sure his movements were gentle. He spoke softly, his voice calm and steady. He told her she was not in trouble. He told her she was safe. The words felt small compared to the moment, but they were all he had. The child flinched slightly at the sound of his voice, pressing herself closer to the corner. It was clear she had learned to be afraid of voices. The rancher did not move closer. He stayed where he was, letting her see that he meant no harm. He looked at the lock holding the metal structure closed. It was old but strong. Whoever had put it there had meant for it to stay closed. The rancher felt anger rise in him, but he pushed it down. Anger would not help the child. Action would. He stood up slowly and stepped back, scanning the room. There were signs that someone had been coming and going. Containers of water, old food supplies, and footprints in the dust. This was not an abandoned place after all. Someone had been using it, hiding something terrible in plain sight. The rancher returned his attention to the child. She was watching him closely now, her eyes following his every move. There was a quiet question in her gaze, one he could feel even without words. He spoke again, telling her he was there to help. He told her he would not leave her. He reached into his bag and pulled out a bottle of water. Slowly, he placed it on the floor, sliding it toward her. He did not push it too close. He wanted her to decide for herself. The child hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the bottle. Her hands shook as she drank, as if she was not used to being given anything freely. Watching her, the rancher felt time stretch. He realized then that this child had likely been alone for a very long time. The thought made his chest feel heavy. He wanted to open the lock immediately, but he knew sudden movements could scare her. He needed to be patient. Once she finished drinking, he spoke again, telling her his name. He asked her name gently, not expecting an answer. She remained silent, but her eyes softened just a little. That small change gave him hope. The rancher stood and approached the lock. He examined it carefully. It was too strong to break by hand. He would need a tool. He stepped back again, making sure the child could see him, and told her he was going to open it. He told her she would not be left behind. He left the room briefly to retrieve what he needed. Every step away felt wrong, but he moved quickly. When he returned, he knelt once more, keeping his voice calm. The sound of metal against metal echoed in the small room, sharp and loud. The child tensed, covering her ears. With one firm action, the lock gave way. The door opened. For a moment, neither of them moved. The child stared at the open space in front of her as if she could not believe it was real. The rancher stepped back again, giving her room. He did not reach for her. He wanted her to feel control, maybe for the first time in a long while. Slowly, very slowly, the child moved forward. Her legs shook as she stood. She took one step, then another, until she was no longer inside the metal structure. The rancher watched quietly, his eyes burning with emotion he did not let show. Once she was fully out, she stopped and looked at him. There was still fear there, but also something new: confusion, curiosity, a fragile sense of relief. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders gently, careful not to startle her. She did not pull away. That small moment felt larger than anything he had experienced before. The rancher knew then that nothing would ever be the same. This was no longer just about a strange place or dark rumors. A life had been hidden away, and now it was his responsibility to make sure it was never hidden again. As they left the room together, the child staying close but not touching, the rancher felt the weight of what lay ahead. There would be questions. There would be consequences, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that the door was open, and she was finally out. The rancher led the child out of the building slowly, making sure she could keep up. The bright daylight outside made her pause. She lifted one hand to shield her eyes, as if she was not used to seeing the sky so openly. The rancher stopped and waited, letting her adjust at her own pace. He could tell every small step was new to her, not just physically but in her mind as well. The air outside felt fresher than inside the building. A light breeze moved through the tall grass, carrying the smell of earth and open land. The child stood still for a moment, breathing it in. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though she stayed close to the rancher. He did not rush her. He understood that freedom could feel overwhelming after being hidden away for so long. They walked carefully back toward where his horse was tied. The child's steps were slow and uneven. She looked around constantly as if expecting the walls to close in again. Every sound made her tense. A bird flying past caused her to flinch. The rancher noticed these reactions and slowed even more, speaking softly to reassure her. He told her she was doing well. He told her there was no hurry. When they reached the horse, the child froze. She had likely never seen such a large animal up close. The rancher gently explained what it was, using simple words. He let her watch from a distance as he touched the horse's neck and spoke calmly to it. Slowly, the child's fear eased. She reached out and touched the horse's side with one small hand, then quickly pulled it back, surprised but not afraid. The rancher helped her onto the saddle carefully, making sure she was steady. He climbed up behind her, keeping his movements slow and controlled. As they began the ride home, the child leaned slightly against him, her body tired from more than just the day's events. The rancher adjusted his jacket around her to keep her warm and safe. The ride back felt longer than usual. The rancher's mind was full of thoughts. He wondered how long she had been kept hidden. He wondered if anyone was searching for her. He wondered how much she remembered of life before the building. Most of all, he wondered how to help her heal. He knew he could not fix everything, but he also knew he would do everything he could. When they reached the ranch, the child looked around with wide eyes. The open space, the animals, the house, all of it seemed unreal to her. The rancher helped her down and guided her toward the house. His dogs approached but stopped when he raised a hand. He wanted the child to feel safe, not surrounded. Inside the house, the rancher showed her a chair and invited her to sit. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself as if unsure whether she was allowed. He went to the kitchen and prepared something warm and simple. He placed the food in front of her and stepped back. Again, he let her choose. After a moment, she began to eat, carefully at first, then with more confidence. As she ate, the rancher sat nearby, not too close, not too far. He watched her quietly, noticing how she held the spoon, how she glanced at the door from time to time. These small details told him how much fear still lived inside her. He did not push her to talk. Words would come later if and when she was ready. After she finished eating, her body seemed to grow heavier with exhaustion. The rancher showed her a small room with a clean bed. He placed extra blankets on it and stepped aside. She stood at the doorway for a long moment, unsure. Then she walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. She touched the blanket, surprised by its softness. The rancher told her she could rest. He told her he would be nearby. He left the door slightly open, wanting her to feel connected but not watched. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Sleep took her quickly, deep and heavy, like someone who had not rested properly in a long time. The rancher stayed awake most of the night. He sat at the kitchen table thinking. He knew he had to contact the proper people. He knew there would be questions and processes he could not avoid, but he also knew that tonight the child needed peace more than anything. He decided he would make the call in the morning. When morning came, sunlight filled the house gently. The rancher prepared breakfast and waited. The child eventually appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She looked different in the daylight. Still thin and quiet, but less shadowed. She watched him carefully as he greeted her with a calm smile. They ate together in silence. This time, the silence felt different. Not heavy, but calm. After breakfast, the rancher gently explained that he would be making a phone call. He told her that other people would come to help. He promised her she would not be taken back to the place she came from. His voice was firm and reassuring. When the people arrived later that day, the rancher stayed close to the child. He introduced everyone slowly. He made sure no one spoke too loudly or moved too quickly. The child stayed near him, holding onto his jacket. He did not pull away. He understood that right now he was her anchor. The conversations were serious but respectful. The rancher explained everything he had seen and done. The child was given water and a blanket. No one forced her to speak. They simply made sure she was comfortable and safe. As the day went on, the rancher realized something important. This was not just a rescue. This was the beginning of a long road. Healing would take time. Trust would take patience. But the hardest part was already over. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the child sat on the porch beside him. They watched the sky change colors. She leaned against his arm just slightly. It was a small gesture, but it carried great meaning. The rancher looked out over his land and felt a quiet sense of purpose settle inside him. His life had been simple before. Now it had changed. And for the first time in a long while, the silence around him felt right again. The days that followed were calm on the surface, but full of quiet movement underneath. People continued to visit the ranch, always respectful, always careful. They spoke in gentle voices and moved slowly, understanding that sudden changes could cause fear. The child stayed close to the rancher during these visits, sitting near him or holding onto his sleeve. He remained steady, offering the same calm presence every time. Little by little, a routine formed. Mornings began with simple meals and sunlight coming through the windows. Afternoons were quieter, filled with rest and short walks outside. The child liked watching the animals from a distance. She did not touch them often, but she liked knowing they were there. They made the open land feel alive and safe. Special helpers began working with her regularly. They never pushed her to talk. Instead, they listened when she chose to share small things. At first, her words were few, sometimes just a nod or a shake of the head. Other times, a single sentence. Each small step forward was treated as something important because it was. The rancher paid close attention, learning how to support her without overwhelming her. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent. He learned that healing was not something that followed a straight line. Some days were easier. Other days, fear returned without warning. When that happened, he stayed close and reminded her that she was not alone. As weeks passed, her strength slowly returned. Her face began to show more color. Her eyes, once always searching for danger, started to rest more easily. She laughed for the first time one evening when one of the dogs chased its own tail. The sound was soft and surprised, as if she had not expected it to come from herself. The rancher turned away slightly, not wanting her to feel watched, but the sound stayed with him for the rest of the night. The truth about what had happened to her became clearer through careful investigation. It was confirmed that she had been hidden away for a long time, forgotten by the world. Steps were taken to make sure that those responsible could never cause harm again. The process was slow but steady. The rancher followed each step closely, making sure her safety always came first. Through it all, the child remained protected. She was never forced to face anything before she was ready. Decisions were made with care, always asking what would help her most. The rancher spoke up when needed, using his calm voice and steady presence to remind everyone that this was not just a case, but a child learning how to live again. As time went on, she began attending a small learning space nearby, designed to feel safe and welcoming. At first, the rancher stayed nearby, waiting outside. Slowly, she became comfortable enough to go in on her own. She learned new things at her own pace. She discovered that questions were allowed, that mistakes were not punished, that curiosity was something good. Back at the ranch, evenings remained quiet and steady. They shared meals, sometimes in silence, sometimes with simple conversation. She began asking questions about the land, the animals, and the stars above them at night. The rancher answered honestly, using simple words. He never rushed her curiosity. He let it grow naturally. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun disappear beyond the fields, she asked him a question he had been expecting but never pushed for. She asked if she could stay, not just for now, but longer. The rancher took a moment before answering. He wanted to be honest but also gentle. He told her that many people cared about her future and that decisions would be made together, always thinking about what was best for her. He also told her something else. He told her that no matter where she lived, she would always have a place with him. That promise was real. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Over time, the heavy shadows of the past began to loosen their hold. They did not disappear completely, but they no longer controlled every moment. The child learned how to feel safe in open spaces. She learned how to sleep through the night. She learned that doors could stay open and that light was not something to fear. The rancher noticed changes in himself as well. His quiet life, once filled only with routine, now carried meaning in new ways. He found joy in small victories like her first full smile, her first confident step into a room, her first moment of choosing something for herself. Eventually, plans were made for her long-term care. These plans were thoughtful and centered on stability, support, and continued healing. The rancher was included in every discussion. His role in her life was recognized, not just as the one who found her, but as someone who had helped her remember what safety felt like. The day came when she moved into a place designed just for her needs, filled with people trained to guide her gently forward. The transition was slow and careful. The rancher stayed with her through it, visiting often, making sure she never felt abandoned. Each visit strengthened her confidence that connections did not disappear just because locations changed. On one visit, as they walked through a garden together, she took his hand without hesitation. It was a simple action, but it carried great meaning. It showed trust. It showed growth. It showed that the future no longer felt empty or frightening. The rancher returned to his ranch each evening with a sense of peace he had not known before. The land was the same, the fences still needed fixing, and the animals still needed care. But something inside him had changed. His quiet life now held a story of courage, compassion, and responsibility. The child continued to grow, learning more about the world each day. She learned that her past did not define her future. She learned that kindness could exist without conditions. She learned that one moment of bravery from a stranger could change the course of a life. Years later, when people spoke about what had happened, they often focused on the discovery. But those who truly understood knew that the real story was what came after. It was about patience, about showing up every day, about choosing care over comfort. The rancher never considered himself a hero. He believed he had simply done what was right when the moment came, but in doing so, he had helped give a child back her life. And in return, his own life had gained a depth and purpose that silence alone could never provide.